Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of video game news for Wednesday, December 11th. And because of a strange occurrence in the last stream, I think I'm going to jump closer into news and try not to have a warm-up section today. Inherently, nothing has changed and nothing is going to change. I'm just watching a lot of variations on a theme, really, as far as different anime series. For the most part, while I'm taking breaks, still trying to clean house, which nothing really is changing there very quickly. It's just very slow. I'm probably accomplishing what would be a normal person's hours worth of work if you are used to working in something that's more physical, laborious type job. And frankly, I'm probably accomplishing what would be a normal person's 4 hours worth of work if you're more working in an office sitting around doing nothing. Which it's always interesting to remind ourselves that yes, there are people working on like assembly lines that are working non-stop for 8 hours plus a day, and then there are also office workers and who may not even be managers, who are sitting around waiting for phone calls and accomplishing very little, close to nothing. And on average, the vast majority of Americans are closer to the office workers, where the actual productivity of accomplishing anything is very low, and what even is being accomplished is often just red tape and busy work. Unfortunately, capitalism has no system to realize that and lower the average work week from 40 hours to like 35 hours with no decrease in pay, without there being major pushes by probably the government to do that. And that's exactly what Bernie Sanders, for instance, has said in the past, but has no real support to do. Of course, none of that has much to do with video games, because inherently I do think video game programmers and developers would end up working 35 hours of a 35-hour work week, if not longer, because there is actual effort in programming and time that it takes in programming and composing and animating and even bug checking and QA assistance and things like that. I would say that it's not until you get into like game directors and management, maybe publishers and HR departments in game companies, that you start to see people that are not working at their full capacity. And each person's capacity is different, and so it is a weird system, certainly, too, that's never going to inherently be fair. So we can see that Marvel Rivals here, if we start talking about video games, is still maintaining a high number of player base. So it's not so far been a flash in the pan. That they're really, the people who did start playing Marvel Rivals seems to have stayed consistent. So there must be a real game there. That being said, I haven't heard anybody say anything as far as articles about it, nor have I seen any YouTubers talk about it. So it may very well be yet another subset of the big community that is gamers that just plays those types of games or plays that specific game, but is not particularly vocal about it, or is not particularly represented by your average gamer or your average video game journalist or YouTuber. Not sure I see too much else. Now, the reason why I may have slightly more viewers today is because a viewer in the last stream made a awkward, kind of spammy attempt to sell themselves as a artist that could help improve my YouTube channel. Inherently, some of their suggestions weren't even in line with what they claimed they could do, and inherently I wouldn't more than likely be hiring anybody that's first and foremost goal was just to get me to go to Discord. Discord's noticeably full of insecurities and its ways of trying to trick people into installing things, and or just going to Discords that it's themselves may get you infected. And yeah, ideally, if I was going to hire an artist, which I'd have to have some income from this channel to justify doing that, because I'm not willing to exploit somebody for free, particularly since I'd have to have them make probably close to 15,000 thumbnails. But if I was going to hire an artist, I'd want them to have their own website, their own domain that either went to their own personal website with a portfolio, or linked to at least something like Pixel, DeviantArt, Tumblr, Twitter. Not Twitter. Well, Twitter would be acceptable. But yeah, one of the more art-focused websites there, that would, depending on which of those websites might make sense. TikTok even. But yeah, Discord is not inherently a public forum, and so if you're not putting your photos out in your portfolio in a public forum, that's weird, to say the least. Just speaks to not really running your business particularly well. Then also there is also inherently the problem of, if I was going to engage with that, just how much work I'd have to do. I'd basically have to do a background check, a copyright check, an AI generated check on any artist, because yeah, I don't want a big conspiracy, or a bit, not conspiracy, but a big event to happen where somebody is legitimately canceled and then they were the artist that made all the thumbnails for my channel. Or I don't want them to come back and try and claim copyright. They would have to sign over all copyrights in perpetuity to me as a commission job, and agree to that. Yeah, it's not particularly good business too to go to one small streamer and try and make a sales pitch to one streamer alone. That's just not going to get you anywhere. It's like knocking door to door and trying to sell vacuum cleaners, which you may notice nobody does that anymore. That there are much better ways to determine if somebody is in the need for a vacuum cleaner or any product, and whether in the mood to actually shop. And I will say it's also very hard out there to run any kind of business. That there is a issue certainly there, in that most people are not capable of wanting to spend any money at all on anything, and if they are so comfortable and trained to go to big businesses like Walmart, Target, whatever, that they wouldn't really roll the dice on small hometown businesses. And inherently in the United States, small hometown businesses have mostly disappeared. I am kind of shocked looking at what Call of Duty Black Ops 6 highlights in its screenshots, as far as this is what Black Ops has become. That, like, this seems militaristic with maybe a little bit of future tech, but then you have completely non-camoed, non-militaristic screenshots. Definitely a focus here on female characters, although this may just be custom character creator. It definitely feels very much like Fortnite, cartoony and colorful, not what I would expect. Here, glowing red and everything. Selling, I imagine, skins. I imagine those are all skins. From someone who, on the outside looking in, who's never played a single Call of Duty game at all, it definitely feels to me like they have moved away from what they once were. But I could be wrong. Maybe the Black Ops series was always ridiculous. Maybe Call of Duty was always ridiculous. And it just has done a very poor job of publishing and advertising that information to people. Which still is a problem, because if I ever was intrigued to play Black Ops and expected something that was a somewhat serious military game, and I got something completely different, that's an issue. I'm going to go ahead and open this tab because we have some pretty big news in that the Steam Deck now has some certified, refurbished OLED models for sale, and I imagine they will go fast. I imagine we may even see that they're out of stock immediately. Now, inherently, I suspect, here's Indiana Jones doing very positively, I suspect that they are at the very end of their run of having any hardware for the LCD version, and they have gotten to a point where they can negotiate licenses on the hardware, or price per unit on the hardware, not licenses, that's the wrong word. But they may be buying enough in bulk now that the price per unit on the hardware for an OLED may not be significantly different from the price per unit on an LCD. Plus, if they stick with the 7.2 inch versus the, I believe it's 7 inch LCD, that they're just going to have more consistency in the dots per inch anyways, because inherently a smaller screen is going to have fewer dots per inch, or more dots per inch. Yeah, more dots per inch. If it's a smaller screen, you have fewer dots per inch the bigger your screen gets, if the resolution is the same, and one assumes that the native resolution for the LCD and the OLED are both 1280 by 800. So yeah, the OLED model here, when not on sale, is $550, comes with 512 gigabytes, and the LCD model that they're still selling is the 256 LCD that is clearly priced to be just under $400. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if at some point they are going to maybe maintain a cheaper LCD model still, but they will move it up to the newer battery and longer playtime, newer CPU, newer GPU stuff. 7 inch versus 7.4 inch. I was off there. If we click here in refurbished, previously it has been the 64 gigabyte LCD model, which nobody really recommended, the 256 LCD model refurbished, which would save you roughly $80 versus buying a brand new, and the 512 gigabyte LCD model, which they're not promoting because that confuses it with the 512 OLED model. And noticeably, the price tag, now that they've added OLED refurbished, is to say you could spend $440 to get that, which is certainly still $80 more expensive than the LCD model, but you are getting newer Wi-Fi, newer CPU, better battery life, newer GPU. I think it's a newer GPU. So I still generally would recommend that, and the OLED model looks a lot better. But you're not actually doing too bad even to buy a refurbished 1TB model. Although, I would argue, unless you know you're going to just install a ton of games, unless you're sharing a Steam Deck between 2 or 3 people, the 1TB model may be a little bit overkill, because you're paying still a premium for that space to not even really get that much more space. You can certainly have micro SD cards that would hold up and back up and let you install things you want installed, but it could run a little bit slower, or a lot bit slower. But yeah, even the 1TB model at $519 is not a terrible price. And I've heard no one say anything bad about the refurbished. So yeah, $519 to get a refurbed 1TB OLED is cheaper than $550 to get the 512 brand new. So at a certain point, you are just paying a snob tax to buy the 512 or 1TB new. Yeah. So yeah, this would be my target suggestion. If you need to save some, certainly, if you want to save $80, then buy this and you're getting a very good deal. I don't think you're getting as good of a deal if the 512 LCDs were even in stock. I'm a little surprised they're even in stock right now. Now, this inherently would come back to the question about, is there going to be some small improvement that happens on a Steam Deck, some small incremental improvement? And everything that's been said implies that that is not going to be the case for at least the next 5-6 months. Now, 6 months from now, maybe, yes, that would be just about the time that you would be at another annual anniversary of the Steam Deck. I could see them coming out with something slightly different visually, maybe just a different color, or them come out with something that's slightly improved, but not to any significant amount. I don't expect that there would be a full generational upgrade. There is also a very high chance, due to rumors and speculation, no, I'll take that back. There are a lot of rumors and speculations. I have no idea about the chance that they are going to come out with a more console-like device that might very well be the thing to buy in the next 6 months. Something that might be a little bit more powerful, but probably not that much more powerful. It may be that Valve stays true to their word by coming out with consoles one year, then portable versions the next year. And a console-like device that would plug into your TV and run SteamOS does have less power limiting factors because it wouldn't be running on batteries, and as such it could be a lot more powerful, and it could certainly be the powerhouse. At that point, if a console-like device did come out, buying that would probably let you stream games at a higher quality, higher frame rate to your Steam Deck, and it might very well push the Steam Deck to be closer to a Game Boy compared to a Nintendo 64, which, yeah, technology has not gotten to the point really where everything can be the form factor of a portable device like a Nintendo Switch and also have the powerhouse performance of a PlayStation 5 Pro. which ideally that would be the case, is that you could just have one device to rule them all, but that's not likely going to happen. I also saw, as someone was covering the new guidelines for labeling controllers that will be compatible and can use the logo to be compatible with SteamOS and Steam, is that the thumbsticks have to have capacitive touch sensors built into them, which is interesting that they would go that way. They're not requiring controllers have trackpads, but they do want it where when you put your thumb on the thumbstick, even if you're not pressing anything, that can be sensed, which is a very minor movement forward, certainly in controller standards. Now, the Steam Deck does have capacitive touch sensors in the thumbsticks and the analog thumbsticks. At some point, I feel like there is something that should be happening where a great rethought happens on controllers completely, where analog sticks probably should be surrounded by buttons, or there should be a way that you can press buttons on the analog stick and never take your thumb off of them. And I don't think we're really at the point where the technology is there. And if that technology was developed, I would imagine you'd wear out that technology quicker than just smashing buttons would happen. Anyways, I said I needed to end this stream somewhat quickly, so let's go ahead and go through the Video Games Chronicles news. Pokemon has partnered with Wallace & Gromit animation studio Aardman. They're collaborating with Aardman on a project releasing in 2027. So I would assume if it's Wallace & Gromit, well, see, I don't know for certain whether that would be a claymation animation or not, but this picture definitely screams to me claymation animation. Yeah. Now you're seeing like a lot of jagginess around the edges here that definitely makes it feel like this Pokeball is claymation, not just animated CGI. Inherently though, I wouldn't be surprised if this is just a 5-minute short, some weird promotion, something that maybe gives you different kinds of art to put on Pokemon trading cards, which I think I've learned at this point playing the Pokemon mobile game, TCG Pocket, that there is a desire there to have different art to sell the same cards over and over again, thus not really increasing the total number of cards that you can play in Pokemon while increasing the value of cards by having extremely rare art variants. Pokemon TCG Pocket right now is doing another event, which to get the gold medal, which I don't think getting medals actually matters too much. Either you do or you don't. You can only highlight 3 of them, so after 6 months of playing the game, you'll almost certainly have 3 gold medals that you can highlight. And I think they're just pictures, so I don't think they're going to look any different for any of the specific events. But the current event is kind of hard, kind of crazy that you have to have, I believe, 5 consecutive wins in a row. Pokemon often win or lose is determined on a coin flip, which is very much childish, simplistic game design, not something that I would really enjoy if I was trying to play it at a higher level. There really is just no way to play Pokemon Pocket at a higher level. But yeah, since there is a lot of times a chance that you will win or lose based on a coin flip, then you are not likely to succeed and get 5 wins in a row. A lot of it has to do with the randomness of cards. There aren't a lot of cards that let you pull cards out of the deck none of the cards really have effects to pull cards out of the deck, so it is all very random, and you're not likely going to have the cards that would be needed to guarantee you a victory or get you very close to being guaranteed a victory 5 times in a row. So yeah, I'm finding that somewhat frustrating that is their second thought for their second event, is just to have consecutive wins. The first event, you just had to have a certain number of wins, which is much more reasonable. But yeah, that is one other thing I'm certainly spending a lot of time on right now, is just playing the Pokemon TCG Pocket on my phone for no real reason. Like, even if I could show it on live streams, which I couldn't because I'm sure the Pokemon Company and Nintendo might copyright claim it, it would not be interesting footage to show in the first place. Moving on with news. Astrobot Winter Wonderland update is coming this week. So Astrobot is continuing, I suppose, to support its fandom. Whatever of its fandom is still playing Astrobot. That's about as much as I think I can say. Kadokawa employees are reportedly in favor of Sony buying out due to issues with the current management. Interesting. So Kadokawa employees not happy with the current management. I don't know if that is a good way of thinking, certainly, and frankly that is fairly manipulable too, and could be straight up untrue. Yeah, you could easily have like 2 out of 2,000 employees that agree to that, and the vast majority of that happens. This all very much seems like the concept of getting rid of one bad boyfriend or girlfriend and then immediately running into another relationship that could easily be worse. And yeah, you really shouldn't be making your decisions that way, in that you are running away from one bad manager right into the arms of Sony, which I don't see a lot of evidence that Sony is a good management company. Like, not really. Sony has maybe avoided some controversies in the past few years. They haven't done anything hugely terrible, but yeah. It is also, as gamers, a weird situation in that Kadokawa employees may very well want a laid-back environment that never requires them to develop or make any more content for games, and so while they may be satisfied, gamers themselves may not be satisfied. And in a lot of ways it does kind of feel like Sony would be that kind of company where there has not been a hard enough push to do something with the Uncharted series, for instance. There really hasn't been a hard enough push to do more with the Last of Us series. And I would exclude like the Last of Us TV show, as that almost certainly was just a license deal and not actually Sony being too involved. And there definitely just in general has not been a hard enough push for Sony PlayStation in particular, to have more games be made. Like the lineup, particularly exclusives for PlayStation, is not good at all. Let's see, Black Myth Wukong is getting a free update with a challenge mode, maps, and new equipment. It'll be interesting to see with that new update if we see Black Myth Wukong regain some of its fandom that it had for the first few weeks. I imagine it has fallen out of favor quite a bit at this point. But, you know, I'm pretty sure it's fallen out of favor quite a bit at this point due to it just not having enough content and replayability as a single player game. And that will be interesting information, since the assumption is that a vast majority of people who are playing Black Myth Wukong on Steam in particular were Chinese people. It'll be interesting information to see if the Chinese gaming audience, as it's emerging and slowly trying to grow into something that can be somewhat reliable and predictable, whether that audience will return to old games due to updates, or whether they move on to something else very quickly. Let's see. The Game Awards will reportedly have at least 2 holy poop game announcements, which, yeah, it's always a problem when you have a headline, and even if you're quoting somebody, to use cursing. I think particularly above the fold type headlines, which should be family friendly. In general, I think news should be always family friendly as much as possible, because you're trying to inform people. You're not trying to entertain or do shock jock radio type stuff. 2 unannounced games. Okay. And then there's a video here that says Suicide Squad killed the Justice League is ending support from Games Daily, which that video seems to not really connect at all to the Game Awards. Yep. Every year you have these events, and every year it feels just incredibly pointless to have so early of announcements for like unannounced games in particular, because by this time next year the games tend not to even be out yet. And there's so little that really could be said that would really matter in the first place. Like, even if you got on stage and you said that Nintendo, Sony, Microsoft, and Valve all are working together in collaboration to make a Uber game that is being in part headed by like 10 different top tier game directors and names you would recognize, Kojima for instance being one of them, Shigeru Miyamoto. Yeah, even if you just made that kind of insane announcement, it doesn't really matter. The game still would be years away. People could drop out, companies could drop out. That kind of announcement would never really happen. Even having 2 people collaborate on an art piece gets you potentially things that aren't as interesting as that individual person working on one thing. Artistic vision tends not to really be collaborative as much as the actual process of developing a game is collaborative. And frankly, Nintendo has a pretty good record of actually delivering when it releases games, but Microsoft, Sony, and even Valve all take way too long to deliver games and tend not to always deliver perfect games when they're released. Well, maybe an exception there, that they do deliver close to perfect games when they're released, but then they never really release a lot of games. Moving on, Nintendo now owns 100% of Xenoblade Studio Monolith Soft. The developers' founders owned 4% until recently, which, if one company owns 100% of of a company, then it probably would be the case that they're going to take the company private at that point. Unless Nintendo is going to try and sell some of the company fairly quickly. Like, you can, as far as I understand it, at least in the United States, own 100% of a company and have it be publicly traded, but then there would really not be any trading happening there. So I wouldn't be surprised if something like the New York Stock Exchange would kick out a listing that just did not trade. They only have 2,400 shares, which isn't even that many shares. So, yeah. My assumption though would be that Nintendo would put it back into being a private, wholly owned subsidiary of Nintendo. And even that is a little different. Like, Nintendo has a lot of secret third-party developers that make, I think, most of what we think of as Nintendo games, and that very little of the Nintendo games are actually made inside proper Nintendo offices and departments. But up until this point, they have been, I think, contracting out that work, not actively trying to acquire companies. So maybe they've seen an instability over the past few years that has encouraged them to actually have more internal departments or subsidiaries in this case. Yeah, I wonder how annoying it is every time I drink water, but gotta do it, so can't really change things here. Here, the image is not centered. Lucasfilm Games says it's super interested to tell more Indiana Jones stories. More Indiana Jones games could be on their way if the Great Circle is a success. Which inherently, I guess that's the same thing you could say about any game series. If something is successful, then yeah, I imagine the companies would want to make more. There is perhaps a saturation point that you could run into fairly quickly. I can't imagine too many people want to play more than one Indiana Jones game per year. And I can't imagine that we're going back to anything that would be a single A or double A level of quality on Indiana Jones. So we're not going to get a new Fate of Atlantis 2D animated point-and-click adventure game from anybody. In fact, there was a fan project around that many years ago, and maybe it got released, maybe it didn't, but it didn't really go anywhere. Nobody talked about it. Yeah, I could see them perhaps redoing the stories of Fate of Atlantis, Last Crusade, Ark of the Covenant, Temple of Doom, possibly too, but it definitely would be in this art style. Yeah. And still at that, if somebody just remade The Last Crusade in this art style, that is going to almost certainly have less sales than a brand new game. And you're going to have to find really good writers to continue to make Indiana Jones games that can walk that narrow path between having a little bit of supernatural elements like the first 3 movies did, but not too much supernatural elements or too much weirdness like Dial of Destiny or the Crystal Skull did, because that turned off a lot of the audience, frankly. This clearly is the only way Indiana Jones is going to go forward, though. Harrison Ford is too old, and Steven Spielberg is frankly too old to really be involved as a director. And yeah, the effort twice now has been to find somebody who could be the next Indiana Jones, and continue the storyline in the same canonical universe, and I just don't think that's going to work. You certainly could have a new Indiana Jones-like character, but you could also, but it's going to have to be in its own universe. It's going to have to be like a Lara Croft type character. Which, inherently, you could modernize the Indiana Jones storyline somewhat in the way those stories are told, so that they are perhaps a little bit less offensive to modern liberals and sentimentality, at least, because that's the people that would be making movies. But maybe then that you would just have a woke Indiana Jones art complaint that would be made at that point. But yeah, I do suspect we will see an occasional new Indiana Jones game getting made. But also, I'm not 100% confident that The Great Circle is actually going to be well played. Seems like it's being well received so far, but I'm just not sure that you won't find that actually a lot of people have just moved on. Not that many people really care about Indiana Jones. Newer generations very much may not care about Indiana Jones, and so it just may not get played that much. It may be that people play it and find it to not be enough like an Indiana Jones feeling to it as you play it, or enough of a modern video game, but you certainly could run into both problems. PlayStation's 2024 wrap-up experience is now live. They can view their personalized stats and with the PlayStation wrap-up tool. I'd forgotten this whole thing existed. It's like every year I forget that they do this. And I believe Microsoft has a similar thing where it just tells you and celebrates how much you played games that year, although in a lot of ways it also is just tattling on you on how much time you spent on games. And I imagine in 2024 people will see their stats are fairly low, because I don't think a lot of people are playing games that were playing games this year. Let's see. People Can Fly is suspending or laying off 120 employees, and it plans to also scale back its self-publishing strategy. I thought People Can Fly was acquired by Gearbox at some point. Were they, or were they not? No, I don't think they were. I think what happened is Gearbox published the remaster of one of their games, and that may have been the entirety of the relationship. It is also noticeable here you have 4 games here, and I can't recognize 3 of them, and I can't remember the name of the 4th one. Bulletstorm or something like that, I think was the name of the game. Notoriously full of way too much cursing. Bulletstorm in particular is what Borderlands could easily have done and been if it had gone more cursy and more offensive, too offensive. Ironically though, I would say some of the gameplay mechanics in Bulletstorm very well should be in the Borderlands game series. For a very long time though, it seemed like People Can Fly has been living on the skin of their teeth, just not having the funding to really make new games or sell new games, and trying to self-publish to probably keep more of the profits of their games. Although inherently being a self-publisher doesn't work after you've already succeeded even with one game, because you're just thinking at a much bigger scale than being like a self-publisher on Steam with Steam Direct. Being a self-publisher after you've had a major success only makes sense if you have a massive amount of money you can play with, which clearly they don't think they do have that massive amount of money, or they wouldn't be laying off people. They made Painkiller a long time ago, and Gears of War, Judgment, and Outriders, which is probably not a mainline story. Yeah. So yeah, we've basically had more stories about People Can Fly doing poorly than we've had stories about People Can Fly releasing games or having any level of success. And they maybe are dragging it out a little bit more than they should. I don't know what they really could do. Like, the craziest thing, and probably the smartest thing to do, would be to license out a Painkiller reboot to somebody else, and then make a sequel yourself to Bulletstorm, and yeah, adjust accordingly to that. There's kind of nothing wrong with the gameplay in Bulletstorm. It's just a fairly old game, and a sequel on a new engine could fix that. And then, as far as all the cursing and ridiculous comedy, you just put new people in charge so that doesn't happen again. You make new protagonist characters in the same universe who are not as cussy, or you have some kind of joke like mechanic where it automatically gets bleeped anybody tries to cuss, and they automatically get fined or something, so they lose points, lose money if they try to cuss. And so in the first 5 minutes you could kind of fix that pretty quickly. Let's see, moving on, I need to build up some momentum here. Cyberpunk 2077 update adds new customization and photo modes, which looks like it's customization for cars more than for the characters. Which, yeah, you hear that kind of update and it really gives you no further details as far as what Cyberpunk 2077 is right now, or is as a game in general. Let's see, December's first PlayStation Plus classic games have been released. Sly 2, Sly 3, and Jak and Daxter, a precursor legacy. Seems weird to release such similar games all together like that. Yeah, you definitely are not pushing people to say play Sly 2 and then next month release Sly 3. I'm not even sure Jak and Daxter is in the same universe, but it definitely looks to be about the same type of game. Yeah, that's another great example of Sony's lineup just not being particularly great, in that usually when Microsoft Xbox Live releases games, there's more than 3 to speak of. The Life is Strange studio Deck 9 has confirmed another round of layoffs. They blame challenging times for the latest wave of staff cuts. Yeah, well, it's certainly not a good thing to they're pointing out videogameslayoffs.com, just tracking layoffs. It estimates around 14,600 people have been laid off, or 14,600 layoffs have happened. It's possible that some people have been laid off 2 or 3 times. What strikes me the most about Life is Strange as a studio is just surprising how much it has managed to survive, and I think some of that is because I think either Ubisoft or Square Enix was probably funding some of the development of some of the Life is Strange sequels, because to my mind the first Life is Strange game probably should have been the only Life is Strange game, and then they should have delved deep to make a completely different type of game as their sequel and either passed or failed at that point, and probably failed and probably just shut down. So it is interesting to see that they've been able to stretch it out to have 3 or 4 Life is Strange games, none of which after the first one are really worth mentioning or playing, in my opinion. But in the longest run, I don't think there's even enough relevancy. If it were like 10 years from now and Deck 9 was completely shut down, they would feel like, okay, they were just some kind of weird Steam Direct publisher. Like, I could easily see 10 years from now somebody not in the know thinking that they were just a Steam Direct publisher who made 5 Life is Strange games and self-published them, and nobody ever saw them or played them. They wouldn't feel too different from so many other game publishers on Steam who have done things like that, where they have just 5 sequels to one series, but never gained any real attention. The big difference between a Steam Direct publisher and Deck 9, though, is that Deck 9 actually did have publishers. They actually did have commercials and advertisements, and they definitely were trying to target a larger audience. They just didn't seem to really capture the hearts and minds of too much of that larger audience. And that may, on some level, also speak to just the wide diversity of game developers, not game developers, but gamers in general, and that there is not a unified single audience that is interested in particularly too many specific games. Moving on, the BAFTA Game Awards long list has been released as DLC has been deemed ineligible for top prizes. So in BAFTA, Shadow of the Erdtree won't win, where the assumption is that the Game Awards is going to be giving Shadow of the Erdtree at least one top prize, if not multiple. So we have a very different decision there, with BAFTA's deciding that DLC should only be eligible for the Evolving Game Award, not Game of the Year. So that might speak also to the UK being more anti-DLC than the US, although it really speaks more towards BAFTA being more anti-DLC than the Game Awards by Jeff Keighley. The long list here is not particularly too long, and well, I guess you could include The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom as being a Eastern game. It certainly doesn't really have that Asian feel, which really only leads Metaphor ReFantazio as a Japanese game, and Black Myth Wukong as a Chinese game being considered. And then some fairly small games being considered also, which it definitely feels like it's very difficult to believe something like Animal Well or Balatro would beat out something like Black Myth Wukong or let's see, Legend of Zelda. Doesn't really feel like they should be in the same categories. It is a much longer list overall. Now, it is interesting to consider that Minecraft is for consideration, unless it too is in that evolving game category, because Minecraft certainly is not new. It has new content in it. And there definitely is an argument to be made that little is going to be achieved by artificially punishing games that constantly add content and promoting the idea that new people should just buy new games always. Unfortunately, that's another point where capitalism corrupts, is that there is this inherent need for a constant influx of more money to game companies to ensure games continue to get worked on and improved. Whereas if everybody in the world was on universal basic income, then and every single video game was just a passion project, those with the highest amount of passion would continue to update their game, like Minecraft, for the love of the art alone. And then you wouldn't have to make games that were designed to lose interest and be replaced with new games every year, which is certainly what a lot of games are designed to do, is to either have that sequel online. Although nowadays it's much more the case that microtransactions is the preferred way to continue to get continuing revenue out of old games. Let's see, Sony shares hit record closing high on gaming prospects. Interesting. What do they know that I don't know, would be my question there. Third-party games? Maybe. Maybe Metaphor, ReFantazio, or some other game is selling a lot higher than I thought it was. I still kind of feel like there is a high chance that the Japanese audience is moving fairly quickly into having PC gaming for their big games, and they're saving up their dollars, their yen, for the next Nintendo console, which the next Nintendo console said it would be announced in the first quarter of 2025. I wouldn't be surprised if that even gets pushed back. The comedian who played Foreman Spike in the Mario movie says he hasn't been asked back for the sequel, which really doesn't mean much, I think, at all. Yeah. One character that I didn't even know was in the movie not being asked back doesn't mean much of anything at all. It would be much bigger news to say that Jack Black wasn't asked back to play Bowser, although it would be pretty big news to just also say Jack Black has come back as Bowser. Inherently, I don't think any of the success or fandom around the Mario movie would change too much if the voice actors changed that much. I don't think kids are going to care at all. Even if kids did recognize the difference, it would just be a playground conversation, a water cooler conversation that kids would have, and where they would go, boy, that voice actor for Mario in the second Mario movie sounded different. But that wouldn't really stop them from seeing the movie or boycotting it or doing any of that nonsense. Kids in particular don't have that many kid movies that get released, so yeah, they tend to want to go and see everything at one point or other anyways. And I don't think they really should or do have any kind of loyalty to voice actors. So we have a follow-up from a previous story here where it says Funko Pop or Funko Incorporated and Broadshield said it wasn't their fault that itch.io was taken offline. Site creator says otherwise. So itch.io's founder still blaming Brand Shield, although inherently it's still itch.io's own fault for having very poor domain hosting, that the entire website would be taken down from the domain registrar's point. Yeah. And this may be very much a masterclass in figuring out for IT people who is the right people to register your domain with, and perhaps that means you spend a lot more money to register your domain with a higher level domain registrar instead of with cheaper domain registrars that won't work with you or communicate with you. Inherently, I don't believe Amazon.com would be able to be taken down based on any kind of claim or report at all. That's not much of an update, but also I didn't read the story in any further detail because also I kind of don't care. I am so far not hearing a lot of people complaining too much that they can't go to itch.io. In the same way, I haven't actually heard too many people. I've heard a couple of people complaining about the fact that archive.org is still broken, but even a major website like archive.org being down seems to have not really slowed down too many people. The FTC is refunding $72 million to Fortnite players over unwanted purchases. Players are getting money back from Fortnite skins that the FTC claims players were pressured into buying. Interesting. So I imagine there is a whole process you have to go around, with the average payment they say being around $114. I imagine though you're going to have to prove that you actually purchased something there. I definitely got some kind of rebate thing that would have gotten me $7, but then to go to the website and fill out all of the personal information you had to fill out, even though I'm pretty sure it wasn't a scam, I was like, just on the small chance this is a scam, it is not worth $7 of my time to fill out this form to potentially get scammed. So yeah, I just gave up on that, and I guess that's what they are hoping too, is that you would scare away enough people to not actually claim the money, so more of the money would go into the pockets of lawyers. Yeah, almost all class action suits have failed at this point, in my opinion, to prevent bad actions from companies. There needs to be a true corporate death sentence that can be imposed liberally on a lot of companies, and a lot bigger fines that maybe should just go straight to funding education in the states that these lawsuits happen. Just spend more money that way instead of trying to do rebates or go into the pockets of lawyers. Moving on, multiple classic Call of Duty titles have appeared on the Microsoft PC Store, sparking Game Pass hopes. Several classic games, including the PC-only Call of Duty, have been released, which is not particularly helpful for people who want all their games on Steam or any other launcher, but does perhaps make an argument that these games can run on modern computers. So it is perhaps a great example of Microsoft being inconsistent and speaking out of both sides of their mouth, though, as far as them wanting their games everywhere where they could sell the most, in that clearly a decision was made here to put it in the very unpopular Microsoft PC Store instead of putting it on Steam or even any other platform like the Epic Games Store or Good Old Games. Geralt's actor says CD Projekt scolded him for saying he would be in The Witcher 4. I don't know how true it is. I went off of a rumor, says Doug Cockle. Which, yeah. That is certainly the problem with particularly voice actors saying they are in a project because in a lot of cases I feel like that is often them saying, yeah, I'm in that game, in the hopes that they will get hired and put in the game, which, yeah. Inherently, I'm more leaning towards the hope that Witcher 4 takes place hundreds if not thousands of years in the future or the past, or maybe in an alternate universe, and I would prefer if Geralt of Rivia as a character just does not exist. Even if he showed up as like a very old person on his deathbed, I just don't feel like you need that connecting thread so much. And yeah, getting rid of Geralt as a character gets rid of Geralt as a character in the previous games and the previous books, where he's kind of more of a jerk character. It allows them to take the established fantasy world that exists in The Witcher and throw out some of the established characters. And that might be for the worse, because that might also mean that some of the romance factors in Witcher 4 may just not be there. It might just go more American puritanical and have one romance path and only one romance character at most. All of the nudity and sex scenes could be thrown out. I imagine that won't be the case, but it is a possibility, just in the hopes of more sales. One would hope that they wouldn't come out with a new Witcher who's even more of a jerk character, but it's possible. That there is an inherent problem in that the Witcher characters are supposed to be kind of unemotional, kind of detached characters, just canonically. So it's going to be a tough job, certainly, for them to introduce a new Witcher that is relatable if he is going to be cold and unemotional. So I feel like they probably should hope most people forget that too, and they do make more of a relatable character. You'd probably want a slightly younger Witcher character too. Not too young, but not super old and gruff. Moving on, publishers reportedly are not nailing down release dates to avoid potential GTA 6 clashes. I use an app called Ground News, which curates a bunch of different news sources and tends to try and label them as being either liberal or conservative based on Americans' definition, I think United States definition of liberal and conservative. And centrist is another category that they label some of the news sources, which does give you a general idea of who's reporting on things. It can be somewhat helpful, but also it's just a pretty good, ignoring that aspect, pretty good curator of news categories. And Ground News very rarely talks about video games, even though gaming is a category, and they had a headline pop up talking about GTA 6's launch. So, surprise to no one, GTA 6's launch is a big concerning deal to publishers and gamers in general. Although, the reality here is that we've seen very little of GTA 6, and I wouldn't be surprised if GTA 6 is just not really the kind of game people want to play these days. And so I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people get it just because it's GTA, and then find it to be somewhat lackluster, find it to heavily push a GTA Online type element and microtransactions, and just not really have that much of an open world storyline experience to it. But yeah, I certainly understand why publishers would be concerned and not want to release their game anywhere close to GTA 6. And that certainly would be a tragedy of 2025 if GTA 6 came out in, say, January, and that was all anybody bought or played for all of 2025. That would be not good for the game industry, certainly. In a lot of ways, buying GTA 6 is just enabling Rockstar's bad development style, which it just makes games designed to have online and microtransaction and money. If you were to look at the last couple of Rockstar related game releases, though, you really shouldn't buy GTA 6 in the first place. The original GTA trilogy was an awful launch, even if that wasn't actually made by Rockstar. Rockstar still had a hand in it. The Red Dead Redemption Online had some popularity at the beginning, but then lost a lot of its audience, particularly with the Red Dead Online part of that, instead of just Red Dead Redemption single player. And I think that game is still pretty buggy. So yeah, if you were to really look at the last 5 to 10 years of Rockstar, they haven't put out anything amazingly good, and they've put out very little on top of that. So that really isn't a good reason to be hyped about the game, other than it's just like GTA with a new number. Here's that story we saw before. Suicide Squad's current season will be its last. Offline mode is coming this week. I imagine this should be to surprise of no one. I don't believe they've been putting any new content in the game for months, and that they have almost certainly just been rolling out content that was mostly finished or already finished months and months ago. The final seasonal update launches in January. I'm surprised that they're even going into 2025. And I don't know how you say anything here other than it was just a major failure. Even 95% off at $3.50 is still not going to catch my attention. Yeah. Kind of doomed from the start type game too. It was a gamble that the Suicide Squad was going to be way more recognizable of a name and way more popular than it really should have been. And nobody should have really gambled on that. Probably would have made a lot more sense to just have it have been Harley Quinn alone killing the Justice League. At least then you'd have the most popular character of the Suicide Squad and the most recognizable character, and Harley Quinn is only occasionally in the Suicide Squad, not always. But the real move, if you were gonna make a game, is to have people playing as the superheroes, not as Harley Quinn and unrecognizable other characters. Which is pretty obvious when you compare that to something like Marvel Rivals. I don't think that there's really that big of a difference between Suicide Squad, what Suicide Squad wanted to be, and Marvel Rivals. This is another example also of where games are being designed from the perspective that you've got to have 4 people playing with you on a team, which that doesn't work for any game other than the most popular games like Call of Duty. And it is certainly a game that was also designed to probably get a lot of microtransactions out of you, probably to take a lot of your time. You could have probably made a single player version of this game that was much shorter in gameplay, put it out, and have spent so little in the development process that you profited from that. This also paints a very poor picture for Warner Brothers games, and almost certainly everything above and below Warner Brothers games, in the sense that they have subsidiaries like TT Games that used to make Lego games but haven't announced or made any new Lego games in a while. And there are other people making Lego games at this point. And then above Warner Brothers games is Warner Brothers in general, which struggles with its TV and movies. And above Warner Brothers in general is their new parent company, AT&T, which I imagine is not happy with their acquisition at the moment as far as Warner Brothers goes. Although AT&T may be stuck between a rock and a hard place, where they may be making as much money with Warner Brothers, even with it floundering, as they are from TV and cell phone and internet services, which is what AT&T would otherwise be doing. So they may be happy to just be more diverse as a company. Cyberpunk 2077 is getting a surprise update 2.2. This feels like this is the same update that we already talked about, unless there's a new update that's going to be a surprise. See, the first Borderlands 4 gameplay will be shown at the Game Awards. It is now come to my attention watching some YouTubers talk about the Borderlands series. I now kind of generally know the story of Borderlands 3, and so I know in Borderlands 3 that they did a kind of ridiculous thing in that they blew up Pandora as a planet. So if they ever want to go back to Pandora, they're going to have to find a way to go back in time or something along that lines. Borderlands 3 also seemed to really do some weird things with the sirens, in that apparently when one siren dies, they can just like transfer the siren energy into somebody else and make them a siren, which makes me wonder what happened to the siren energy of the sirens that died in Borderlands 1 and 2. Yeah, who knows. Anyways, so Borderlands 4 is definitely going to be a different world and probably a different game. Borderlands 3 also a different world and a different game. A lot of the reviews that talk about Borderlands 1 and 2 definitely say that the humor in Borderlands 1 and 2 is just cringy and hasn't aged well, but I kind of feel like they have to just embrace that. I think that the danger was shown in Borderlands 3 when you try not to stay within that world. Yeah. At a certain point, I guess it is somewhat like if you were going to do a historical movie set during the slave era in the United States, but you were going to not show any slavery and not show any racism and not show any of that, it just isn't going to ring true. Inherently, even in 2025, if you're going to make a slave era movie, you're going to have to admit to yourself, we're going to have to show racism, we're going to have to show slavery, we're going to have to probably use words that are not acceptable to be used in any other situation, just to show the hatefulness behind those words. Yeah. Like the whipping scene in Roots, certainly. If somebody tried to censor out the whipping scene in Roots, people would go, no, that misses the whole point, and that's just whitewashing the reality of the situation. I feel like video games are also going to have to say, particularly Borderlands, they're going to have to say, hey, our Borderlands universe has to center around that attitude and that feeling and that crassness that was in Borderlands 1 and to succeed. And I think particularly Borderlands 1, because even Borderlands 2 started to get a little bit off the mark, and Borderlands 3 seems to be way off the mark, and I just don't think that they are bounding forward to finding a new Borderlands series in Borderlands 4 that could be something completely different. There is inherently in Borderlands a maniacal killer, gun-loving sentimentality that has to be admitted to and embraced. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to have a game that has bazillions of guns that are randomly procedurally generated, shooting thousands of enemies that you will likely run into in Borderlands 4. Even the pre-sequel, which I haven't gotten back to play any, feels completely off just by being made by a different company and having a bunch of Australian voice actors, 2K Australia, making Borderlands the pre-sequel. Other than that rant, though, if Borderlands 4 shows anything, it'll probably be fine. There is perhaps room for concern here that the game won't be too much improved or too much different, though, since it is coming out in 2025, where I could see it easily doing better if it was delayed at least another year. There is, I guess, a danger too that now that it's moving to the Unreal Engine, I believe Borderlands 3 may have also been on the Unreal Engine, that it just stops looking like Borderlands. It just becomes a generic shooting game, which even that might succeed as fewer and fewer people are actually interested in like Call of Duty type games and Halo type games. And even Destiny is coming to an end, so I can see Borderlands 4 potentially being more realistic and just pulling off some Halo fans, some Destiny fans, some Call of Duty fans. And yeah, that might work too. It's a little surprising that the Borderlands series hasn't tried to have more of an esports type side game or mode, because that could kind of work. Like a bunch of random procedurally generated guns being used against other players in lanes, like a Dota game, might work fairly well. Like, the balance would be crazy. There would be effectively no balance at all, and so maybe that would hurt its esports chances, but maybe as a casual esports game that wouldn't matter too much. Perhaps that is something that Borderlands could improve upon, is that they could steal some ideas from some other genres and go in some different directions. Moving on, the former God of War art director has joined Naughty Dog, which I guess the question here, you look at the screenshot and you assume the art director would be for the rebooted God of War. But yeah, it's also very possible he was the art director for the original run of God of War games. Nope, he is for the rebooted one. Yeah, art direction wise, I would say that clearly they're going to try and go in a new direction and reboot God of War, and so they probably wouldn't want the same art style, and maybe a different art director is needed there, although not inherently in my mind it isn't necessary to replace art directors. I would say though also the art direction of the God of War reboot isn't amazingly good. Like, the red hair and yellow arms of the boy and his outfit just really stood out and never looked good. The weird kind of nipple coverings of Kratos always felt weird too, and his outfit is not particularly iconic. The beard element, while being bald, feels a little weird too, but well, yeah, you'd almost assume that Kratos couldn't grow a beard. And yeah, looking in the background here, there really isn't anything else to really comment too much on that's amazing. Now, I know that when God of War Reboot came out, people praised the visuals and loved the way it played, so the final product was good, but I would say some aesthetic decisions could have gone in different directions and been even better. Of course, this is coming from somebody who hasn't actually played any of the God of War games. Any of the Reboot games, at least. I think I may have played one of the PS2 games. Oh yeah, and I guess it is worth mentioning that the PlayStation 3 emulators, one of the PlayStation 3 emulators, has been released for the Raspberry Pi 5. So for the first time now, we have actual reasons, other than maybe a slight improvement in performance, to potentially try and run a emulator on a Raspberry Pi 5 versus running it on a Raspberry Pi 4 or a 3B Plus. For the most part, you could emulate everything you could emulate on a 3B Plus and save some money, and we still have not gotten to the point where RetroPie has really embraced the Raspberry Pi 5's improvements in CPU and GPU capacity. For the vast majority of NES era games, the emulation is going to be exactly the same on the Raspberry Pi 5 as it would be on the 3B Plus. But with a whole new system core effectively being possible now, I think we will finally, feels like it's been a year and a half at least, we'll finally start to see RetroPie maybe decide to make a new version specifically targeting the Raspberry Pi 5 and specifically targeting the PlayStation 3 emulation, which PlayStation 3 games in particular being emulated are going to be some of the hardest emulation out there to accomplish until you start getting into PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 or Xbox Series, Xbox One games, just very close to current gen, if not current gen emulation, which I don't anticipate that Raspberry Pis will be able to properly emulate those games for a long time. And there is something to making it feel a little bit morally right if you are actively not trying to emulate the current generation of games that are currently available on sale. And PlayStation 3 games, for instance, now not really on sale. You could probably buy them used, but none of that money is going into the hands of anybody who actually developed a PlayStation 3 game. But yeah, actual progress there, and kind of surprising progress. I wasn't really anticipating that PS3 would ever really be able to be emulated on a Raspberry Pi. That being said, it is also still worth pointing out that even if RetroPie did come out with a new upgrade, it's going to be a tough decision to decide to spend $100 to maybe $200 in parts and accessory to build a RetroPie machine versus spending $400 to get a Steam Deck. They could emulate a lot more and do it a lot better. Yeah, the prices of Raspberry Pis have just been going up and up, and so it's crossed a price point where it's not cheap enough, and inherently Raspberry Pis being used for anything else are starting to get way too expensive as a single board computer or any other kinds of use. Let's see, we had already talked about the Lego Fortnite adding its social role player experience called Work Life. These are older stories, so we'll go ahead and skip those and move on to the Gamatsu headlines. Ino Tria, the last song for Xbox Series, launches December 12th. It's currently already available on PC and PS5. Golf with Your Friends 2 has been announced for consoles and PC. Yeah. Let's see which game this is. This is not the game I was thinking of, but it is just a golf game, as far as I can tell. Looks fine. Inherently, I imagine putt-putt and any kind of golf is very much a social experience, something perhaps you should be actually doing in the real world for the uniqueness of it versus doing it online. I heavily suspect that something like this is something you probably wouldn't play too much of. And 12-player chaos definitely screams that this is probably targeting streamers and content creators more than people who actually just have 12 friends that would all want to golf at the same time. The Astrobot Winter Wonder update launches December 12th. Donkey Kong Country returns HD, has an overview trailer. I believe this is the I guess if it's a country game, this has to be a remake of the Super NES game. That would be my assumption here. And that this is Donkey Kong Country that has been remade once before as Donkey Kong Country Returns. And then now it's been HD-ified. Unless this is somehow a whole new game, but then why would you put it in HD? Description's not really helping me here figuring out whether... I mean, this could be a whole new game. As someone who never played Donkey Kong Country, I couldn't tell, really, if this was a whole new game or if this is just a remake of an old game. It feels like it's a HD version of a remake of an old game. And I guess it is also probably worth mentioning here that Nintendo's definition of HD here is probably not holding it to a particularly high standard compared to what other people would expect from the description of HD. And I guess the funny thing here is that we are really only a few years away from people just starting to label things as 4K, video games in particular, is that you'll just have 4K variants of games. Of course, to get that to really work, you're going to have to get that frame rate higher. Yeah. Guess if there's a modern mode and an extreme original mode, that tells you that it's a remake of something. Seems like they made the game easier, which is probably a good thing. Donkey Kong Country is another one of these games that I believe was made by Rare, and thus Nintendo didn't really care as much about it. Whereas I feel like it had enough of a cult following that there should have been a Donkey Kong Country style game for every new console instead of just remakes and re-releases. Nintendo could potentially be at the forefront of re-releasing games in 4K if they somehow could get some kind of hardware that outputted in 4K at even 60 frames per second, but I don't even think that's really a standard. I think once you're going up to 4K, you're needing to target 120 frames per second, or at least 120 hertz. You might cheat it by doubling frames to get to 120 hertz, but yeah, the likes of DF Retro would definitely catch you if you were cheating it. But yeah, since the Nintendo games are cartoony and less demanding, they could be at some point on the forefront of 4K re-releases. Although, if we start getting to more PC gaming where you can choose your own resolution, the concept of 4K re-releases may just not make any sense, really. And that inherently also has to assume that people have 4K TVs or monitors, and right now people don't. And I bet even 10 years from now, a lot of people won't. Moving on, Gimmick 2 for the PS4 and 5 and the Xbox One series launches December 19th in Japan and January 30th in the West. It might very well be a case where UHD, probably not called 4K, just UHD releases come out and they offer double the frame rate at 1080p or the same frame rate at 4K, which then that would be a much bigger offering for a lot of people if they just wanted to keep their 1080p monitors but wanted a smoother frame rate, more consistent frame rate. Let's see, Gal Guardian Servants of the Dark launches March 27th, 2025. I feel like this is one of those games that was from the same publisher or maker as Gun Gal Online, and that there is a level of lewdness to this game, so I'm not gonna click the trailer for that reason. Yeah, it's always interesting to see how well these games sell and how well they're accepted and how well they're promoted. It tends to be the case, though, that they get accepted and promoted very little and don't sell particularly well. But who knows whether that's due to an actual lack of audience or a lack of promotion. Speaking of promotion, what seems to be fan-made, and I'm gonna just have to assume got the AOK license-wise game based on the Rocky Horror Picture Show came out several months ago, I think, maybe a year or two ago even. And Games Done Quick did a speedrun of it, and yeah, watching the gameplay of it is interesting to say the least. It is very similar, I would say, to the DuckTales NES game, and it is very much just kind of a throwback platforming, pick up blocks and throw them at enemies style game, which is, I guess, as good as you could do around the Rocky Horror Picture Show, since it's really not designed to be a game. If I was going to make something inspired by the Rocky Horror Picture Show, it would probably be a singing game or a dancing game instead, and that wouldn't work any better, I imagine. But yep, very weird game, certainly to speedrun, and very weird game to exist in the first place. Also, a niche game that is not likely going to get a lot of people's attention and definitely didn't get a lot of promotion. I didn't even see it mentioned on Gamatsu, so I don't think it put out any press releases. I'm still waiting to assume I would assume at this point, if he didn't have permission, the proper license, there would have to be some parody exemption that was preventing somebody from suing him, because Paramount, I feel like, still owns the rights to the movie. So I think they could claim something there as far as copyright if they cared. But maybe they know that the audience would just be really upset of that if they did that, and they know the game isn't going to sell that much anyways. It's certainly not the musical I would pick if I was going to make a video game based on a musical, or movie I would pick if I was going to make a video game based on a movie. That does make an interesting question, certainly, if you were to go down just the list of all the movies you can think of, what movies would make good games and what wouldn't. I think you could do a lot of horror movies like The Grudge very easily, like very easy to make horror visual novels around that cheaply and quickly. I think you could definitely make some decent action games based on action movies like The Terminator, which they've tried and succeeded only a little bit on that. But yeah, romance movies, I think you'd have a tough time making romance visual novels that would attract a big audience that way. And yeah, there's probably entire genres of movies that really wouldn't make a lot of sense, although you could probably squeeze a lot of them into games. Sports movies, for instance, could be converted into sports games, although you also have to question whether is it really worth licensing a movie to make a game when you can just make a game that's inspired by a movie, considering how poorly things like Friday the 13th, the game, really turned out. Moving on, Prisma has a gameplay trailer. It's a turn-based RPG. Don't recognize this game, but also I don't want to spend too much time here. That is an interesting animations happening here. A lot of motions, a lot of panning and zooming on the camera. This is probably a great example of where trailers are showing off the very small amount of stuff that has already been made, and there's just going to potentially be a lot more content in the game that hasn't been developed now. And what I'm taking from this more than anything is that it seems like you're probably going to spend the vast majority of your time just grinding on enemies and that enemy fight mechanic, but they definitely have some hope for more of a Persona style experience where you're out doing other things, which I assume is how Persona goes. It's also a Kickstarter game, so it may never come to release at all. A 2D craftervania, interesting new term I haven't heard before, called Kintum, has been announced for the PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. Which, So the concept of a craftervania would assume that it's a Minecraft style game where once you craft a certain thing, that thing would become a key that would allow you to enter other areas. Right now, what I'm seeing does not seem too different from something like Terraria or Minecraft. But perhaps there is a thought here where things get finished, and when those things get finished, you're just not repeating it and doing it over and over again, and that there is an actual ending to this game. Although I don't know if I really believe that from what I'm seeing. From what I'm seeing here, it seems to me like my assumption is wrong, and you don't craft items that become keys, and that they are just saying that this will be a 3D platforming game where you're out and about fighting enemies to get materials to craft things and craft an ever expanding base. Yeah. Yeah, I don't feel like the Castlevania Metroidvania aspects that usually are used to describe something with the Vania term seem like they're actually in this game, but maybe they are and I just don't see it in the trailer. A game called Slime Heroes launches February 13th, 2025. Yeah, having watched several anime series that all have slimes in them, there definitely is a standard Japanese love of slimes, more than I really understand, frankly. Slimes, I guess, are just your commonplace monster that don't seem like they're too offensive to smash and kill compared to rats, which in fairness, I will give me a slime any day over killing 100 rats in a game. But yeah, slimes show up in a lot of animes and a lot of RPGs, all I assume originating from Dragon Quest series. See, a game called 2M2 has been announced for consoles and PC. Apparently this was a photograph adventure game, although notably that game must have come and gone because I don't even remember these visuals. So unless 2M1 looked very different, yeah, this definitely is not ringing a bell. You can definitely tell that some of these games want you to wishlist them very early because they've got their Steam pages up and ready as soon as they put out the press release, which is the right way to do it, certainly. Like, that is the smart move, and every game should do that if it is going to be released on Steam. Now, weirdly, I don't know how much wishlists really matter on things like the Epic Games Store or any other storefront, but game publishers and developers swear by a high level of success of having games wishlisted on Steam. I assume that affects how promoted the game is too, that a highly wishlisted game, when released, makes it to the front page, where a low unwishlisted game will not. Moving on, a period drama simulation game called Wild Society has been announced for PC, although it seems to also have some magical element to it, and I would have to also question who really wants that. Looking at these few screenshots, I would kind of assume that this is just trying to be Animal Crossing, but slightly different, ever so slightly different. But yeah, I certainly am not the target audience, so I have no idea what part of period dramas attracts people. Usually, let's face it, usually women. Whether it is the fashion, whether it is the polite society facade that never really existed in the past, whether it's the tea times or the furniture or what. Like, I'm not sure what really catches people's attention there. I think there's perhaps a overconnection to romance stories that would have worked just as well in modern times that just happened to be set in period times because that's when they were written. Or, yeah, people certainly do idealize the past quite a bit, and certainly a whitewashed past that most period dramas would be showing you, not the reality of what really would have been occurring at that time. Sugardew Island launches in March 2025. This is a cozy farm shop simulation game. Doesn't seem too different from the previous game we just looked at. My feeling definitely is that there is a trend here. This is definitely more about farming, this game. There's a trend in developers that may not actually be echoed by a trend of people who are willing to buy and play games, in that people are trying to make more cozy games. Make cozy games a thing that is just always going to be popular as a category, and I question if that's true. Inherently, Minecraft probably could be described as a slightly cozy game. It's not that cozy. You do have some danger and fighting in it, but yes, if you do find one cozy game that catches people's attention, I imagine people would play the heck out of it, but then that would be the only game that succeeds. And so far I haven't really found even a single game other than Animal Crossing that meets that description. I wouldn't be surprised if people are just playing the now full version, which you have to pay to start to get everything, of Animal Crossing on the cell phones. A lot of these other cozy game developers may have been too late. A game called Despilote has added the Switch version. I would assume that's how you pronounce that. It is a weird looking game, but I already have it on the fall list, so I'm not going to make a new YouTube short on it. There was a long 40-minute interview from one of the YouTube creators' channels talking about YouTube shorts, in which they brought in a content creator who makes shorts, and basically they just promoted every bad habit that I imagine everybody who does engage with shorts hates, just as far as clickbait. 100% you've got to do clickbait, where there were actively YouTubers telling you to do clickbait. They call it the hook, but it's really just clickbait in the general. And the content creator they were interviewing very much was just doing the same kind of garbage TikTok challenge stuff that that has very little value. So it's kind of pointless, I think, to engage with shorts, and I think that's why most content creators don't engage with shorts, in that nothing that can be done in even 3 minutes is going to have any value to it. It is going to be just incredible clickbaity surface level video that doesn't even have a way to link back to a longer form video. So you could do 1 + 1 = 2 in a YouTube short, and that's about the level of information you can pass on. You can't even explain in any further detail what 1 + 2 would be, or what the reason is that 1 + 1 = 2, which you could go into an hour potentially mathematically explaining that. But yeah. And inherently, looking at YouTube shorts, I really only look at the shorts shelf on YouTube to see my own shorts and see how well they're getting views, some of which get some decent views, some of which don't. A lot of my YouTube shorts are still part of the broken ones, so they have the wrong label on them, which doesn't seem to really hurt or help in any way anyways, as far as what the title is, since most people don't even see the title. Somebody did catch one title that was wrong, and I was able to correct that. But yeah, anytime I see anybody else's shorts, even if it does convince me to click on it, I am always, with 100% consistency, dissatisfied when I walk away from a YouTube short. I'm never happy. I'm never motivated to go seek out that person's channel or seek out more information. Almost always any shorts I do click on are already just clips of longer form videos I've already watched. And yeah, it's a sad statement that that's still very much the focus of YouTube right now, is to compete against TikTok, which the sale of TikTok in the United States still is being demanded by the United States, and the federal government is not going to give any kind of injunction on that aspect. So we may very well see TikTok getting banned in the United States, which would be a major ban certainly in the next few months, which then may bring over a decent amount of TikTok people to YouTube to look at all the awful shorts and change. A lot of content creators may jump over to YouTube, which may change the whole way who's making content and who's succeeding from making content from shorts. I also saw another YouTuber deciding to just move all of his old videos over to a completely different channel, in some thought that that would increase monetization on those videos. And it's an interesting experiment to watch somebody else risk the success of their channel on, but I don't think it's gonna work. Like, I don't think that whatever he's heard or whatever he thinks is happening with the algorithm, I don't think that's going to somehow fix it. That being said, I also know that an even more different YouTuber is re-releasing old content in 4K versions, or at least claiming they're 4K versions, instead of letting his channel go completely quiet, which isn't the worst thought ever. To make a whole new render of the videos. Of course, you might be cheating too. You may be downloading the 1080p version of the videos and then trying to clean it up and upload it more as a 4K version. The right thing there, of course, would be to go back to the source material and make it a 4K version. Anyways, don't want to take too long. I have at most an hour and 13 minutes left before I have a hard out. So, our last Gematsu article says a game called NAIAD is now available for all consoles and PC. I'd assume that's Naiad. That's how you would pronounce that. And that's going to bring us to the Gaming on Linux. Billionaire is annoyingly good. This looks like this is potentially a pachinko style game. Let's watch a little bit of gameplay here to confirm that. My thought here is that it's balls falling down on a pachinko machine and perhaps having more of an effect than what you normally would have. Well, it's more than just pachinko, and it looks like it even has a little bit of pinball there. Seems like it has some random rogue elements also. Now, I will also say that this trailer and visuals feel like a big turnoff to me. Also, like I would have to have a pretty good constitution there because it does feel like that can be fairly annoying. Although maybe that's just a trailer and the gameplay itself may be less annoying. Although I could, even looking at the still screenshot, I could say this looks like this might be fairly annoying. That there may just be way too much going up on screen, and at some level, like pachinko, you may just not be controlling enough for it to be a game worth really playing. Let's see. Moonwatch mixes Bullet Hell and Survivor game with time stopping and deck building into something strategic. Another game that I imagine runs on the Steam Deck. Let's see. Ruffy in the Riverside is a unique action adventure where you have the power to copy and paste textures. Oh yes, I recalled this one. It's not out yet though. Yeah. This one was a bit weirder as an experimental thought in that you are running around this kind of adventure world, but then to maneuver yourself, let's see if we can see the texture copy element there. Yeah, there. So he just copied the rock texture of the rocks and turned it into, pasted it onto the tree. I think textures is probably the word people would think of first, but it's the wrong word. What you're really doing here is you're copying surfaces and applying it to other surfaces, which is different in that if you were just copying textures, then they would still interact the same way. The waterfall may look like a bunch of leaves, but you would still allow you to walk through it, where almost certainly the concept is that you turn the waterfall into leaves so you can climb up the leaves to get to a higher spot. You wouldn't be surprised if that gimmick is only one of a few gimmicks and is actually fairly limited in that I imagine there might be a lot of surfaces you can't copy, and there might be very few surfaces overall. Ambitious here, to say the least, going to 2D. You can definitely see some Mario Odyssey inspiration there. And you definitely can feel some Ocarina of Time inspiration here too. So yeah, suffice it to say, Ruffy in the Riverside does have my attention. The mystery adventure game Duck Detective: The Ghost Glamp has also been announced. At some point I might need to just find some extra time to update my macro so this actually does so it actually opens the Steam links to these games. I don't feel like there has been a previous... No, there has been a previous game, Duck Detective: The Secret Salami. Okay. The Epic Games Update Unreal Tournament website linking to free downloads from old Unreal. So they have now straight up just updated their website to say go to old Unreal to download the original Unreal games. Not that I think most people really want to do that or play those games. We already definitely talked about Valve now selling refurbished Steam Deck OLED models. Again, the 512 OLED normal price is $549 US, refurbished, bringing it down to $439, so $110 difference. The 1 terabyte OLED is $649, with it being refurbished being brought down to $519, which, if you were going to spend the same amount of money, you definitely should buy a refurbished 1 terabyte over the $549 new. Like, warranty wise, I don't think it's going to be too much. You might get something that's scratched, certainly, but particularly for kids, yeah, you get the same 1-year warranty as a new Steam Deck, unless longer is determined in what country you reside. So yeah, you're even getting the same warranty, whereas most of the times when you're buying refurbished products, you're getting 90-day warranties, 60-day warranties, 30-day warranties. But yeah, it definitely makes a lot of sense. Go ahead and get that 1 terabyte OLED and save $30 versus buying a new 512 terabyte OLED. That's really the only difference between these two models, is the amount of storage space. The storage speed, I believe, is exactly the same, but it's close enough. Here's the other story I was talking about. PlayStation 3 emulator RPCS 3 has been released for ARM64, which, because it's been released and compiled for ARM64 chipsets, that means it will work on a Raspberry Pi 5 and Apple Silicon. Which, yeah, Apple Silicon I won't speak too much to, because if you're emulating on an M3 or M4 chip, you're still playing within the Mac OS operating system and Apple products, and I just don't think that is the best place, really, to be trying to play video games in general, let alone emulation or new games. Yeah. There aren't that many PlayStation 3 games out there to say that makes Apple Silicon devices, whether it's an iPad or MacBook or whatever, it doesn't make it a gaming device per se. And then we talked again about how the Raspberry Pi 5 is just really expensive once you get all the controllers and accessories and power plugs set up, and it is just kind of hard to justify that. And notice how they are specifically saying the Raspberry Pi 5, even though AMD 64, or what was it, ARM 64? Yeah, ARM 64 theoretically would run on a Raspberry Pi 4. They're not even beginning to target the less powered Raspberry Pis. I assume it runs very poorly, if it runs at all, on a Raspberry Pi 4. The comedy adventure Elroy and the Aliens is going to launch in April. And I really am just getting completely different games being mentioned on Gaming on Linux now. See, that's what I thought Komatsu was covering, was that it was covering basically all the games being announced, but clearly that's not the case. And maybe there's a chance I still would have seen these games when they came out on Steam, but even that procedure, in which I try to look at all the new games on Steam, seems to not actually show all the new games that get released on Steam somehow. I don't know how that works, but it seems like it is the case. Let's see, Space Marine 2 has added DLSS3, FSR3, and frame generation. It's more playable on the Steam Deck, but it needs a launch option for desktop Linux. That's a fairly big game. Proton Experimental has added initial speech synthesis support, and lots of games have fixes for the Steam Deck and Linux, and easier modding. Now, Proton adding initial speech synthesis support is interesting, because I don't know what programs or what games in particular, since it's Proton, would be engaging with that. Oh, well, it apparently works with one game called Infinite Stars, the visual novel. But you do have to install voice files. So maybe there has been this backend API that Steam has slowly been working on in secret more than anything, where speech synthesis was a thing. Certainly I could see where having speech synthesis for visual novels that otherwise don't have that would be very helpful. I kind of feel like some of the emulators of like NES games and such also do have something like that, where they are doing actual optical character recognition of the text on screen to synthesize it to try to make older games or less funded games a little bit more accessible. Certainly I would play more visual novels if I knew that it had voice acting, and speech synthesis could help with some of that too. But I also just don't imagine it's going to work perfectly. I don't think Valve is going to come out with a great text-to-speech element, and that's not really what this is. This is speech synthesis, which would have to probably use an API to really engage with it. I imagine they are nowhere close to having a tool where you could just automatically add speech synthesis to any random visual novel or any random game overall. And at a certain level, that is a failure of PC gaming too, because even in the earliest days of the current generation of PC gaming, it would have been easy enough for games to have an API to port out the text for blind people and accessibility reasons. And there just hasn't really been a major focus on accessibility until very recently, and even now the focus when they talk about accessibility is often not very consistent or standardized or even helpful. And it is worth pointing out that speech synthesis is not going to inherently help anywhere as many blind people as it would help people that just don't want to read or can't read. Dyslexic people and lazy people will get helped way more than blind people, who still probably won't know the button prompts and still won't be able to actually play the vast majority of games, even if it did have speech synthesis. I think we already had talked about OBS Studio 31 being released. They have definitely implied that they're going to take their sweet time as far as version 32 also, so this will probably be the last major release for a while, and the next release will probably have some slightly longer list of new features being added to them. Inherently, I'm almost 100% happy with what OBS is right now and don't need it to really update for any real new features until they can think of new features that would be helpful. As long as it's stable, I'm happy, and that's what I'm really looking for in my computer right now, is just make it stable more than anything else. Just work and don't have bugs and don't have lockups and don't have crashes. That's what I want in my computer right now. And then this is an old story as far as their brand new guidelines and logos. Alright, and that's going to bring us to GameDeveloper.com, which for the last couple streams, GameDeveloper.com hasn't opened any articles at all, and today it seems like it's opened a bunch of them. So I feel like the programming may be so broken that when it sees even one news story that it can recognize, it goes and opens a whole bunch of them, pretty much all of them, I would suspect, on the front page. And it's not looking at the newest links, it's probably looking at like the number 6 link. So it's taken a week or so before the number 6 link was even something new. That's my suspicion as to what has just happened. We shall see. So we start to go through it, and Firefox wants to update way too much. So they have a report here, itch.io, taken down by the collectible maker Funko and an AI tool brand shield. We've talked about this before, and now the update on that was that Funko and Brand Shield are denying that it's their fault. Deck 9 confirms a round of another layoffs. The Like a Dragon devs opens up on sharing source code, inspiring future programs. So does that mean they're actually going to share source code, or did they just say in an article that they were going to potentially share source code? Yeah, I think they very well may have just said in an article here. Now, I would also say I doubt Like a Dragon source code is particularly helpful or particularly good. So this may be the beginning of a trend that we're seeing, because there was also a story where the Capcom was doing a contest effectively to get free labor out of students to use and make games and game pitches effectively using the Resident Evil engine, the RE engine. So it may be the case that game companies in Japan are embracing concepts of more code sharing in one way or the other as a way of tricking or locking in the next generation of programmers into using their code instead of perhaps more open source coding, such as using like the Godot engine or open source libraries that would be usable in things like the Godot engine. A Like a Dragon based code game will undoubtedly play a lot like a Dragon games, which may be a good thing or not. Dragon Quest III's HD 2D remake has sold 2 million copies. Google's latest AI innovation offers a putrid vision of game development. Another supposedly life-changing AI model. Another exasperated plea from a weird game journalist. This is obviously an opinion piece, but yeah. These concepts that AI is going to do creative work from and take away work from game developers is concerning, but almost certainly not true. There is also a theory here that all these AI companies are in competition with each other to make the wildest, most ridiculous claims that they can't actually fulfill or back up at all. But yeah, just looking at these screenshots, notice how several of these are blurred to begin with. So you have to eliminate over half. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 blurred images here, and 1, 2, 3, 4 unblurred, so half exactly. So eliminate them because you can't really see anything at all. And then here you have what you assume is a generic AI fantasy world, which is just a landscape. Here you have an empty world with a character running. Here you have a generic forest with a character robot running, and here you have a desert with pyramids with a robot walking. Maybe this robot is walking too. None of that is particularly impressive. None of it has any real detail. None of it screams anything unique or that couldn't be done by a human. It definitely just feels like any 3D animator could make these same screenshots in just a brief amount of time. Like, so yeah, color me unimpressed just by the screenshots alone. Film Stars final seasonal update party goes on confirms that the party is very much over. The Dark Math Games obtains a 7-figure investment for its debut project. XXX Night Shift ZA/Zoom veterans are reuniting from a major investor from Disco Elysium days to work on a true detective RPG successor. Let's see, the support developer PTW opens a spin-off studio in South Carolina. Have to assume that they were support company for Mortal Kombat, thus the screenshot. Yeah, and then the rest of these stories I think are pretty old stories, fairly old stories from GameDeveloper.com. There definitely is getting to a point here where I'm still supposed to be cleaning house, but I may just want to take a bit of a break, and I may decide to spend one day working on the macros. Yeah, working non-stop day after day, week after week is not particularly healthy for anybody, so taking a day off and doing something different, or just taking a day off and resting is a good thought, I think. Yeah, a lot of game developers' stories are a little bit more evergreen, so some of their headlines may be fairly old, but it doesn't change that much as far as the relevancy of what they had to say. Most of their headlines tend to be somewhat relevant. Anyways, that's going to bring us to all new games on Steam, and I am noticing I have just about 50 minutes, so I'm going to try and hunker down here and go through all of these games very quickly. Just seeing some more Japanese-centric games getting published, although noticeably none of them so far not supporting English, at least not claiming to support English. Shooter and the Wanderer, Mystery of Serpent Coil Island, really should have already had a YouTube short made around it, yet it didn't. Gotta say no to that one. Yeah. Still would assume that we are too close to Christmas to really expect too much to come out. Although I'm getting weirdly and pleasantly surprised that I am seeing a decent amount of games coming out. Now, for non-video game reasons, I would personally just like to take this December 11th and turn it into January 11th in the blink of an eye. But yeah, that's not going to happen, obviously. Yeah, I would prefer to get away from winter. I think that would be a nice thing. It is a shame that humans can't actually hibernate. Otherwise, I might take it up on that. If humans could hibernate, it would actually solve a decent amount of time problems too. I could see a lot of people choosing just to sleep half their life away, particularly if it was just cheaper. Always had a sci-fi short story in my mind where eventually society is just going to be so overpopulated that you're going to have these government assigned cubicle apartments where there's just an A society and a B society, and a night shift and a day shift society, and people are going to be sharing those apartments or sleeping in them or hibernating and cryogenically frozen. Whatever technology would actually exist. Yeah, and I could see that too. You solve a lot of problems if all of a sudden half of the calories of the entire human population is removed. Yes, humans need 2,000 calories to maintain a healthy, active lifestyle, but if they're just sleeping, if they're just cryogenically frozen, one would assume that they wouldn't need that much, depending on how that went. And then if you don't need that many calories, you don't have to grow as much food, you don't have to have as much of a environmental impact, things like that. And we're still getting Gematsu articles in the middle here. So the Famitsu review scores for issue 1878 are out, giving Gimmick 2 29 out of 40. That's pretty low. Love Too Easily 28 out of 40, and Real Teen Battle of Othello 26 out of 40. So this is a particularly low scored week as far as new games. There is of course a danger if society, here's another one of these probably selling on lewd imagery games. Yeah, very quickly you would have governments, if you did have cryogenics or forced hibernation for sleeping as a case, you would have it be used unfairly one way or another, often I imagine as punishments, in which even the smallest of crimes might end you up losing healthy young years of your life. Of course, that still may be better than imprisonment, but it's not ideally what you would want to see happen. I'm going to say no to that. Give this a chance. Yeah. You hear about people talk about those experiments where you live in an underground cave for a certain amount of time, which that experiment I think was literally only done once or twice. It was not replicated, and I don't think it would be really replicated. Unfortunately, Vita's Rewind is yet another poorly received Power Rangers TV spin-off game. Yeah, I probably would be one of the type of people that could do something like that, on the huge caveat that I could play video games and on the huge caveat that I could at least make footage that I could release after the fact, if not live stream. I don't think those relationships, those experiments though, particularly even make the most of sense. We see Legacy of Kain Soulweaver 1 and 2 is overwhelmingly positive, so that's good news. This fandom. Now, there is a license issue for the first game in the series, which was either called just Soulweaver or was called something else. And yeah, that first game in the series is also, I don't think it doesn't play really the same way. So it's probably pretty easy to not play the first game in the series, but it is kind of a shame that no proper reboot of what really would have been a trilogy instead happens. And it's still kind of a shame even here that there isn't a proper remake of these games, and this is just a remaster and re-release of an old game series. That being said, I also have to point out that it's not going to sell that well. Yeah. I shouldn't have closed the tab. We could have scrolled down and seen how many people were actually playing it, and that would have probably highlighted the peak of its fandom too. There is something very much on the visuals there with Legacy of Kain that any remake of that game would probably have to change its visuals quite a bit, even to tell just the same thing, same story. Yeah. I could certainly see somebody making it a very different looking experience. Here's Billionaire being rated very positively too. Still not really sure I'd want to play that game, but there is a potential future here in the next year where I might start buying games more consistently. I still would wait until sales. I'm not gonna go full crazy on it, but I could see myself trying to play some newer games, trying to motivate myself a little bit better by having newer games to play. But that kind of burst of purchasing basically has to be not followed and preceded by a major burst of content creation on my part, which that's not it. Funko issues a statement about itch.io takedown, while also apparently calling itch the founder's mom. This is not a joke. Funko just called my mom. Interesting. I wonder how they got the mom's number, if the mother perhaps was involved in the domain registration. I have no idea how old the person is that runs itch.io. So it might be that they started fairly early and needed the mother to set up the domain of itch.io 10 years ago, and now they may be in their 20s or 30s. You know, that's believable, and that perhaps the mother's phone number hasn't changed and was on the domain register's contact info. That is one of the problems I think exist around registering a domain, is that you have to give all kinds of contact info to just the general public that the domain registrar will release to the general public on request. And so you just don't have that kind of safety and anonymity that you probably deserve in making a website domain. And there is a decent argument to have a PO box, have a fake number, office number or something like that, and just or just straight up lie when registering a domain name, because it doesn't really benefit you any. Yeah, unfortunately that is just the copyright system in a nutshell, is that it is designed around making it incredibly dangerous for any individual who can't afford a lawyer to do anything successful, because any major corporation that can afford a lawyer can just sue you into oblivion, even if they have no real grounds for a lawsuit. And I don't know how you fix that. Zombies ate my femboy. Doesn't look like a particularly good game, and I don't see how taking Zombies Ate My Neighbors and adding a femboy to it changes anything. This is one of those kinds of games that I have to question why this is being allowed on Steam, just because it feels like it is a low effort troll game. Looks like there's animation made in MS Paint, and yeah, I definitely think, even if Valve wants to be hands-off, which clearly they do, they should take some examples, make some fake examples of what they are not looking for on Steam Direct specifically, and then make people that do have games that match their examples of what they don't want go through a more stringent process of outside of Steam Direct. Because yeah, they've made some comments here and there, but clearly the whole process of publishing a game allows too many people to ignore those suggestions and still put up a lot of garbage games. And it confuses the issue, certainly, because here you have like Go Home Annie, which on the face of the screenshots I would say looks like it's probably nothing, because there's just no picture of any of the antagonists in any of the screenshots. And yet I'm confused that it's at 77% positive of 54 users. Yeah, and I just don't know how to really get around that confusion other than to wait for more reviews. Anyways, that's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Bye.